If you are reading this letter, it means everything happened exactly the way I feared. But let me start from the beginning. My name is Artyom. At the age of 19, I suddenly realized that I wanted a rifle, that I wanted to go hunting, to shoot ducks, and to spend evenings listening to stories by the fire. That summer I spent hours on forums, scrolling through ads about hunting dogs for sale, flipping through photos of other people's trophies. The problem was simple. I had no hunters among my relatives or friends. Driven by passion, I joined a hunting club. The men there turned out to be solid guys. They explained everything, helped me get my license, collect the necessary certificates, even took me along to the shooting range in the summer. Together with them, I chose my rifle, and they even helped me install a safe at home. At work, my boss grumbled at first, but eventually waved it off and let me go. I told only my father. My mother wouldn't have understood, she would have worried too much. And so, autumn came, and we set out. 2 off-road vehicles, 4 men, and a ginger spaniel named Fool. By evening, after endless bumps and washed-out roads, we barely made it to our destination. I was the youngest in the group. Palik and Sergich, the 2 older hunters, kept teasing Mishka, a skinny guy with an army rucksack that he never let out of his sight. Behind his back, they called him the hunchback. The road is completely washed out, said Palik, steering onto the shoulder of the dirt track. The ruts were overgrown with grass, young saplings already pushing up under the wheels. Do we go from here? Mishka rolled a toothpick from one corner of his mouth to the other. His dog whimpered in the back seat, begging to get out. We won't get any farther anyway, replied Palik, pulling out a cigarette. His curly-haired hunting dog was already running circles around us. You shouldn't smoke, the game will smell you a mile away, grumbled Sergich. Tonight it doesn't matter. Palik waved it off. We only need to reach the cabin, by morning the smoke will be gone. The men jokingly called themselves the pensioners, and loved mocking everyone else. They had quit smoking a year earlier and now never missed a chance to lecture others about bad habits. Mishka had his own story. His dog had been called Fool since puppyhood, after once shoving his nose into a beehive and getting what he deserved. Everyone ready? Then forward, comrades. Mishka opened the trunk. We took our backpacks and rifles, strapped on headlamps, and set out along the trail. Dusk was falling fast. The path led straight into the forest, and the weight of my pack pressed on my shoulders as if it were filled with stones. Still, we managed to reach the hunting cabin before night fully fell. The cabin stood in a clearing by the edge of a lake. Old logs, tiny windows, a moss-covered roof. The plan was simple: a quick supper, prepare gear for the hunt, and sleep. Everything was done out of habit. We laid out our rifles, pulled out the decoys, checked our flashlights. Then we lay down on the hard bunks. No sooner had we turned off the light than an owl hooted outside. Bad omen before a hunt, Mishka remarked. Doesn't count tonight. Palik waved him off. Sergich said nothing, only rolled onto his other side. But that night I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, my lower back ached, my arm went numb. The wind wandered around the walls. The first drops of rain began drumming on the roof. Suddenly, Fool let out a quiet whine. Hey, what is it? I whispered. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Someone was walking around the cabin. The ground under the windows was wet, and each step thudded dully, as if it were right beside my ear. My heart hammered so hard I almost cried out. I didn't dare look out the window. Soon the rain grew stronger, and the footsteps faded. I fell asleep at last, uneasy and in scraps. Artyom, up, you'll sleep your life away. Palik barked right over my ear. I'll sleep it later, I muttered, and then remembered the night. My eyes flew open. The men were already making breakfast. Mishka was cooking buckwheat with canned stew. I looked out the window. Sunlight lanced through the branches. My soul thawed a little. I washed my face with icy water from the barrel and got ready quickly so as not to hold anyone up. We ate and headed straight for the lake. I glanced back at the cabin. The rain had washed away all tracks. I decided not to mention the footsteps. They'd laugh. A couple of kilometers later we reached the water. The men threw together a blind. I set out the decoy. And then the waiting began. Most of the gear we'd prepped the night before, so after breakfast we moved out right away. Fool splashed through the mud, tail wagging, bumping his nose into his master's knees every so often. By noon we were at the lake. The men quickly knocked together a makeshift blind. I set out the decoys and the call. We settled in, readied the duck calls, and went still. Time crawled. The hot tea was gone, the sandwiches too. The autumn sun shone, but sitting motionless in an ambush chills you fast. The veterans knew, by noon, there's no point expecting game. We were about to pack it in when a flock appeared in the sky. "They're coming," Sergeich whispered. 35 meters, Mishka estimated, spitting out his toothpick. "Don't rush it," Palak nudged me in the ribs. "Too soon." I wasn't going to shoot yet anyway. I blew the call again. The ducks circled and dropped lower. The decoy on the water flirted and beckoned them in. 25 meters. "Let them come closer," Mishka murmured, eyes on the sky. "Now you can." A cannonade split the air. Several birds crashed into the water. Fool shot out like a red bolt and went after the quarry. The men clapped each other on the shoulder, grinning. "That's it, boys." Sergeich rubbed his hands. A handsome haul. Drunk on happiness, we headed back to the cabin. Fool carried the trophies, proud as ever. Then he stopped, tucked his tail, and slunk to his master's legs. "Not good to be greedy," a voice sounded behind us. We spun around. A tall, bearded man stood there, wearing a strange jacket of tanned leather and fur. He had no rifle, no knife. His eyes were brown, shining as if the sun were trapped inside them. "Share your catch," he said, holding out a calloused palm. "We waited half a day for these ducks," Mishka grumbled, gripping his gun. I was about to say we could make a trade, but didn't have time. "Come by in the morning," Sergeich said evenly. "If we shoot more, we'll share." "And if you don't?" The stranger smirked. The corners of his mouth twisted crookedly. He turned and walked away without looking back. We stood watching until he slipped behind the trees. We headed on in silence. The joy of the harvest had been blown away like smoke. By evening the wind picked up hard. Sitting by the fire was impossible. The flames crawled along the ground and died. The warmth whisked straight through our clothes. We decided to hole up in the cabin. That night I fell asleep quickly. But I woke to Fool's desperate howl. That night I drifted off fast. But I woke to Fool's desperate howl. The dog was crouched under the bench, trembling, scratching the floor with his paws. My heart dropped into my heels. "He's just spooked by the wind," Palak muttered. But he glanced at Sergeich, and both men looked uneasy. "Where's the hunchback?" Sergeich finally asked, squinting into the darkness. Mishka wasn't in the cabin. We grabbed our flashlights and rushed outside. We shouted, whistled, called. Silence answered us. The lake lay still, the decoy ducks in their places, not a trace to be found. We even swept the shallows with poles, but nothing. As if he'd fallen into the water and vanished. Back at the cabin, we built a big fire, hoping Mishka would see the smoke from afar. All night we took turns feeding the flames. But by morning a storm rolled in, and we had to put it out. The sparks flew straight into the forest. When I finally dozed off again, I felt it through my sleep. Someone was walking around. I listened hard. No footsteps, no breath. Just that prickling sense of a gaze. I woke to Fool nudging his nose into my ribs. Semyonik, no, by now he was just Palak, was lying beside me. But Sergeich was gone. We bolted outside, shouting his name. Again, nothing. On the bench by the wall lay Mishka's army rucksack. He had never gone more than a step without it. Now we were two. With the first rays of dawn we searched again. Circled every trail around the lake, combed through the bushes, called, whistled. Fool ran back and forth, sniffing, but always returned empty. It felt like there were no traces at all, as if the earth had swallowed the men whole. We decided not to touch their belongings. We took only our own gear and returned to the cabin. We were already preparing to head out to the road on foot, when Palak suddenly cursed violently. The keys. He slapped his pockets. Sergej had the car keys, and Mishka had the spares. Cold crept through me. Maybe they're in the glove box, I said. We dashed to the parking spot. The cars were right where we'd left them. But the keys weren't there, not in the first, not in the second. We searched everywhere, under the seats, under the mats, behind the visors. Nothing. Don't people hotwire cars without keys? I asked weakly. Fairy tales. Palak waved me off, exhausted. We'll walk. It's 10 kilometers to the highway. We'll make it before dark. We shouldered our packs, took the rifles, and set off. We walked quickly, without stopping. The forest seemed to close in around us. The thought spun in my head, what if they're still alive? What if they're waiting for help? But with every minute, hope thinned. Dusk fell suddenly. We switched on our flashlights and decided to keep moving, to reach the road. But the longer we walked, the clearer it became. The path wasn't leading us out. And then a clearing opened ahead. In it stood a cabin. The same one. Our hunting lodge. That's impossible, I breathed. Palak said nothing. He walked up the steps, pushed the door open. Inside, everything was in its place. 3 rucksacks by the wall, 3 rifles, and only the dog reminding us we weren't alone. Let's go in, he said, and stepped inside. We propped our rifles against the wall, unrolled our sleeping bags. Fool climbed straight onto the bunks, curling up at my feet. Maybe we shouldn't sleep? I suggested, hearing how crazy it sounded even to myself. They both disappeared while we were asleep. Palak was silent for a while, then nodded. You're right. Let's just talk. Anything, just stay awake. We talked about everything, school, work, life. I rambled on until my tongue stumbled. My eyelids grew heavy, my mind slipped away. And still, at some point, I fell into sleep. A long, mournful howl woke me. Fool sat by the door, scratching at it with his paws. Dawn was breaking outside. I looked around. The cabin was empty. Palak was gone. On the bench by the wall lay 3 extra rucksacks. 3 rifles. Only the dog remained. That was when I realized I was alone. When the thought hit, something inside me snapped. I remembered the tale the old villagers used to tell, that the master of the forest does not tolerate greedy hunters. Maybe it wasn't just a tale. I sat at the table, pulled paper and a pen from the glove compartment of one of the cars. And I wrote, "If you are reading this letter." Then I drew a thin cut across my palm with a knife and sprinkled the wound with salt. The pain kept my eyes from closing. I decided I would wait by the fire, meet my end with eyes wide open. I lit a blaze. The flames crackled, throwing a circle of light. Fool paced at my feet, whining, glancing nervously into the dark. For drakes lay beside me, the trophies, which now felt like a curse. And then I heard the voice again. Surely you won't eat them all yourself? I jerked around. Behind me stood the same stranger in the tanned leather coat. The coat hung open, as if the cold couldn't touch him. His eyes still carried that strange light, like firelight burning from within. Take them, I forced out, pointing to the birds. For each one, take a soul. He smirked, and from the wide sleeve of his coat a chipmunk darted out. It scrambled up his shoulder, slipped into the fur, and vanished. Darkness closed in. The ground dropped away. The last thing I felt was the hot tongue of the dog licking my face. Artyom, wake up. I opened my eyes. Palak and Sergej stood over me, while Mishka rummaged in his rucksack. Alive. All 3 of them. Fool leapt happily around. You scared us, Sergej grumbled. Finally woke up. The note. I rasped, trying to rise. What note? Palak looked puzzled. I glanced at the table. There lay a sheet of paper, on which a hand like mine had written, "If you are reading this letter." My palm stung. On the skin, a thin, fresh cut. The men noticed nothing, only exchanged glances and shrugged. They started gathering their gear, as if nothing had happened. And I sat there, holding the paper, realizing, it could not have been a dream. Only the forest knew the truth. We packed up rifles, decoys, supplies. Nobody spoke, as though silence itself could protect us. No one mentioned the night, the disappearances, or the paper with its ominous words. We just stuffed our things into the trunks, avoiding each other's eyes. Fool sensed what men could not. He stuck close to me, tail tucked, ears flat. No more racing ahead, he walked like a shadow, never straying to the side. The road back turned out even worse. Mud sucked at the wheels, and more than once we had to push the cars together, shoulders straining. At one point Sergeich switched off the radio. On every station there was only static, like someone breathing into the speaker. "Broken," he said shortly, looking away. Soon the sun began to tilt toward the horizon. The wind picked up, clouds smothered the sky. We tried to drive without stopping, but then Palak slowed suddenly. On the roadside stood a man. The same one. In the tanned leather coat. He didn't wave, didn't ask for a ride, just stood and stared straight into the windshield. "You see him?" I whispered. "Keep driving," Sergeich snapped. The car lunged forward, but when I looked back, he was gone. As if no one had ever stood there. By nightfall we reached the village. Windows glowed with light, smoke curled from chimneys, dogs barked. It all looked so peaceful, as if the horrors of the forest had been left behind. We rented a small house from an old woman on the edge, brewed tea on the stove, and ate bread with canned meat in silence. And then the howl came again. Fool raised his muzzle and howled so long and hard that my chest seized. Dogs all over the village picked it up, a whole chorus stretching one note into the night. "Sleep," Palak ordered. "Home tomorrow." But none of us managed to sleep. Someone passed outside the window, heavy footsteps. The boards in the entryway creaked, as if someone touched the door. We sat frozen, gripping our rifles. No one dared to look out. In the morning the landlady greeted us with a crooked smile. "He came to you last night," she said quietly. "The master of the forest." We exchanged glances. None of us had the courage to ask how she knew. We drove out at first light, when damp fog still hung low, like sheets strung between the spruces. Fool climbed onto the back seat, laid his head on the jackets, and didn't stir. Palaka's car took the first rut, mine followed. No one spoke. The silence in the cabin felt thick, like a padded coat. At first the road seemed familiar and simple. The turn at the old pine, the bridge of 2 logs, the fallen stump with twisted roots. We ticked them off with our eyes and glanced at each other in relief. It felt like we were finally past it. But an hour later the landmarks began repeating, as if someone were spinning the forest on an invisible reel. The leaning bus stop where no buses had run for years stood to the left. We passed it, turned left, then right, crossed a boggy lowland, and came back to the same stop, only this time it stood on the right. Sergeich cursed under his breath, clutching the wheel until his knuckles whitened. I tried the radio again, static. Then something like breathing. Not music, not voices, just the steady inhale and exhale of someone sitting beside us, listening. I clicked it off. The silence grew even thicker. "We've been here already," I said. "Don't get smart," Palak cut me off. "Keep right, toward the birch ridge." We veered right. The sun still hid behind clouds, the grayness mixed with the smell of wet needles, damp brake pads, and dog fur. The wheels slipped in the clay, and a few times we had to get out and shove the cars forward. Fool didn't bark, didn't dash about like before. He only stared at one spot beyond the glass, as if he saw a trail hidden from us. Then it began, the part one still cannot explain, no matter how many times I tell it. We passed a clearing where a single pole stood, stripped of wires. 10 minutes later, the same pole again, with the same chip knocked out of its side, the same tin can nailed to it. I leaned out the window, ran my finger over the splinters, traced a scratch shaped like a fishbone. When, after a while, we came to the pole once more, the same scratch was there, fresh, as if just carved. "We're going in circles," I whispered. "No circles," Palak snapped. "Old logging roads twist. It's just loops." He gripped the wheel as if his hands could shove aside not just the car, but the thick, rubbery air itself. Sergeich kept silent, jaw working, chewing on his anger. Fool suddenly lifted his head, whimpered softly, pressed his nose against the window. On the roadside stood a man. The same one. In the leather coat with the fur collar. He stood rooted to the ground, folds of the coat damp, yet in his posture there was no cold, no fatigue. Brown eyes stared at us, unblinking. We rushed past, and I had just enough time to see his left hand clutching a duck's carcass. His right hand was empty. He didn't wave, didn't smirk. He only looked. And in that gaze was no request, but a reckoning. "You saw him, didn't you?" I whispered. "I saw no one," Sergeich muttered, but his voice cracked. Not long after, the road spilled us onto a crossroads of two forest tracks. We braked, stepped out for air. Silence pressed down, not a bird, not even creaking branches. I set a bottle of water on the grass. At once it beaded with condensation. "All right." Palak pulled out a paper map, spread it on the hood, smoothed it flat. "By logic, we go here, along the stream. West. No sun, we use the compass." He placed the compass on the map. The needle wavered, hung, then pointed the wrong way. Palak tapped the glass. The needle spun, obediently settled north. We lifted our eyes, and through a sudden rent in the clouds, the sun showed itself. It stood exactly where no north should be. "Perfect," Sergeich said grimly. "So the compass lies, the sun mocks, the roads loop. Like a child's ghost story." "We drive," Palak said. "Standing still is worse." We climbed back into the cars. Before starting the engine, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The crossroads lay empty. But on the grass, where I had set the bottle, there was a dry circle, as if an invisible palm had wiped away the dew. From then on, time turned syrup thick. We drove, and drove, and drove. The landmarks repeated, but each time altered, as though someone played a game of spot the difference with us. At the leaning bus stop, one board was missing. The twin-trunk pine now had one withered branch. By the uprooted stump, a child's toy lay, a plastic soldier with one arm broken off. I picked it up, turned it in my fingers, felt a chill like pressing my tongue to ice. "Leave it," Palak said softly. "Don't take what isn't ours." I put the toy back. When I climbed back into the car, I noticed on the floor mat by my boots a dark brown feather. A duck's feather. I knew for certain it hadn't been there before. We forded a shallow stream. The water was murky, the bed stony. Palak crossed first, feeling each rock with the tires. I followed. Beyond the ford, the road suddenly smoothed out, the forest opened up, and for a moment I thought we were free. That moment is still with me, a bright window in a black corridor. On the left, a sign nailed to a tree came into view. In Polish, it bore the name of a village unknown to us. The paint was fresh, the letters clear. We drove toward it. The houses met us in silence, windows like hollow eyes. Gates stood open, a damp sheet hung on a line, but no people, no dogs. "I don't like this," Sergeich muttered. "Keep going." We rolled onto the main street and stopped at an old water pump. I went to it, yanked the handle. Iron screeched, coughed up rust, then released a stream of cold, clean water. I washed my hands, filled a bottle. And then, in the glass wall of a deserted bus shelter, I saw a reflection. Not my own. Behind me, slightly to the side, a man stood on the roadside. The man in the leather coat. I spun around. Nothing. Just the empty street and a pale scrap of paper floating in a puddle. I picked it up. On the crumpled sheet, in someone else's confident handwriting, were the words, "If you are reading this letter." I clenched the paper in my fist, shut my eyes, inhaled sharply. Sergeich walked up, saw me trembling, sniffing at my fear like a wolf. "I've got one like that at home," I whispered. "It's lying there. I left it in the cabin. But it's at home." "Let's go," Palak called, slamming his car door. "While the road is still soft." We drove out of the village, and within minutes plunged back into the forest. Not long after, the road bent, and a moose cow with a calf stepped out onto it. She looked straight at us, holding our gaze for a moment, then moved on, lightly, almost noiselessly. Only the dry crack of branches under her hooves betrayed her passing. When their backs disappeared into the brush, it hit me suddenly. We couldn't force this. Couldn't push, couldn't rush. We had to follow the rhythm of those who belonged here, those unafraid to live in this place. "Slower," I said quietly. "Go slower." "We're crawling already," Sergeich grumbled, but eased his foot off the pedal. We drove like one enters a church, without noise, without haste. Fool sighed, stretched out across the seat, for the first time that day relaxing fully. And the forest seemed to ease too, the way trembling leaves settle after a storm. At the fork where we had circled before, now stood a cross. Rough, nailed from 2 planks, with a wreath of dried wildflowers tied to it. From the wreath hung a feather charm, braided with thread and someone's stubborn patience. Palak stopped, opened the hood, pulled a can of stew from the crate, cut off a slice of bread, and laid both at the foot of the cross. He didn't cross himself, no, just gave a nod, the kind one gives to an old acquaintance. "For those who are gone," he said. And so the road becomes a road. We drove on. And then, suddenly, the forest fell away. The horizon opened, and in the distance lay the strip of a highway. A real one, with markings, the sound of tires, the sight of rare passing cars. I don't remember how we rolled onto the asphalt. I just remember the hum of rubber changing, the weight slipping from my shoulders. At the first roadside cafe, we stopped. Fool jumped out, stretched, lapped from a bowl of water. We sat by the window inside. The air smelled of coffee, fried potatoes, and sweet pastries. Cups were set before us, bread sliced, soup brought out. People around us talked, someone laughed, glasses clinked behind the counter. Everything was so ordinary it made me want to weep with relief. I went to the restroom to wash my face. In the mirror above the sink, I saw myself, pale, with dark circles under my eyes, a thin line of tightened skin across my palm. The cut was clean and narrow, like thread. For a moment, the water warmed, and in the glass behind me, half a step back, took shape a shadow. The outline of the leather coat, the fur collar. I spun around, slapped the wall with my palm. Empty. Only droplets clinging to the cold tiles. Back at the table, Palak ate in silence. Sergeich stirred his tea without raising his eyes. I sat down, took a piece of bread, noticed my fingers tremble. "He let us go," Palak said, not looking up. "But he hasn't forgotten." "For what?" I whispered. "For 4 ducks. For how we took them," Sergeich replied. "For how we refused when asked. For how we laughed when the owl hooted." He spoke without anger, simply stating it, like the wind states that night is longer than day. We finished our tea, paid, and stepped out to the cars. On the windshield of mine lay a duck's feather. Thin, slightly damp. I lifted it with 2 fingers and didn't throw it away. Slipped it into the glove compartment on top of the papers. Let it be. Maybe it wasn't a thing but a sign. Maybe sometimes signs can be outwitted if you stare them down. From there, the road became ordinary again. Signs appeared, a gas station smelling of fuel and hot dogs. The attendant asked where we'd come from. I said, "From the forest." He smirked. We paid, drove off. Only later did I realize, I hadn't named a city, nor a village. Just the forest. As if no other answer existed. By evening we reached the city. We scattered to our homes like piles of firewood, each going our own way. Fool bounded into my kitchen, sniffed the corners, curled up on the rug, and fell asleep at once, snoring like a little tractor. I opened my rucksack. At the very bottom lay a folded sheet of paper. The paper was slightly damp, its edges bent. I unfolded it. If you are reading this letter. The same slant of the letters, the same heavy pressure at the start, fading at the end, as if written by a weary hand. At the bottom, my name. Every stroke familiar, as if carved into my memory. My phone buzzed. Palak. I put it on speaker. You home. Home. Your hand. The cut is still there. Mine too. And Sergich's. So it was real. What now? A pause. A breath. We live, he said. And we remember. We hung up. I went to my room, sat on the edge of the bed. In the window, the reflections of neighbors' lights shimmered. For a moment, one of them glowed not yellow but warm orange, like firelight. A stripe of shadow slid across the curtain, as though something large had stepped past. I walked closer. The street outside lay empty, wet asphalt shining, a rare car passing by. I pressed my palm to the glass. The cut stung like a needle. Fool raised his head, looked at me, gave a quiet bark as if to say, I saw it too. Then he flopped onto his side and resumed snoring. That night, I couldn't sleep. Half dreaming, I clearly heard steps on the stairwell. Heavy. One. Then, another. Then it was as if someone had sat down on the bottom step, elbows on knees, waiting. My heart pounded in my throat, choking my breath. No more steps followed. Only the faint crackle of the kettle cooling on the stove. Toward dawn, I dozed off. I dreamed of a forest, not the one we'd been in, but tall and bright, with crystal air. A man in a leather coat walked between the birches, leaving footprints like old bast shoes. He never looked back. I followed, then caught up, walked beside him. He smiled faintly, not cruelly. And he spoke in a voice that carried no age, no language, only meaning, you understand. I nodded, and woke with the sense that I truly did. Not everything, not completely, but enough to live on without foolish defiance, without slavish fear. There is a forest. It has its law. In that law we are laughably small, but not unnecessary, so long as we don't grow meaner than needed, or greedier than allowed. In the morning, I carried 4 bones to the balcony. A small, silly offering. Nothing mystical, just a gesture. I laid the feather from the glove box beside them and said aloud, as though we were back by the fire, thank you for the road. For a second, the wind stilled, and in that silence the city courtyard felt like a forest glade. Then a crow croaked on a nearby roof, and everything returned to ordinary. Later that day Sergich called. His voice was calmer. I called the old landlady, the one we rented the cabin from, he said. Asked if anyone had come to her that night. She chuckled. Said, of course. He always comes, when someone takes more than they can carry. She said it exactly like that? More or less. In her own words. He went quiet, then added, will we go again? I stayed silent for a long while, staring at a stripe of sunlight on the floor. We'll go, I said at last. But not the same way. That evening I sat down at the table, placed the old sheet with, if you are reading this, beside a blank one, and began to write. No lofty phrases, just what I had seen, what I had heard, what I had done wrong. No clever conclusions, only one simple truth. It is better to share than to argue with those who are masters here. When I finished, Fool came over, laid his head on my lap, sighed softly, and closed his eyes. I stroked his warm ear, and the sting in my palm eased for a moment. Outside, a car passed. Somewhere distant, a train whistled. The world lived its ordinary life, with schedules, paychecks, receipts from stores, and at the same time with something ancient, stirring in the dark beneath the roots, following tracks into the deepest thickets. I caught myself smiling, not from joy, but from clarity. For the first time in a long while, everything seemed in its place. And still, when I lay down and turned off the light, orange glowed briefly in the darkness of the room, like a coal in a campfire. Somewhere close, an owl hooted. I didn't flinch. I only whispered back, not with my voice, but with my breath. I hear you. And the forest, it seemed, heard me in return. If this story touched you and you want more, stay with us. Subscribe, like us, so you don't miss the moment when a new story knocks on your door. Write one word in the comments that caught your attention today. It could be the start of our next story.